I ran wild when I was a teenager. Looking back, I believe that joining the army saved me from jail. That's not why I signed up. I walked into the recruiter's office because I had seen how the most beautiful girls all flocked around the soldier boys in my local bar one Saturday night, not long before the fight broke out that left me with a split lip. The sergeant behind the desk eyed me up with a dour expression that looked like it had been carved onto his face, then slid over a form for me to read and sign. "You know which way up to hold a pen?" he asked. I wanted to tell him to go to hell, but I wanted myself a uniform and a gal draped over my shoulder more, so I buttoned it. In the 5 years since then, knowing when to keep my mouth shut had been a saving grace for me in the infantry. I'm not the strongest or the fastest, but I've never questioned an order out loud and have always got to it as quickly as I could. As the truck carried us towards the city, I sat in silence, ready for whatever was about to be thrown at me next. A storm was hot on our heels, a bad one. It was due to reach the city in a few hours' time, and the authorities had ordered a total evacuation and requested military support. The army did not regard grunts like us as important enough to have a view from our transport, but as the miles passed, the constant sound of horns sounding, of sirens wailing, and the chatter of helicopter blades passing overhead made my skin tingle with anticipation. We disembarked at 1700 hours. The NCO screamed at us to move it. Out on the street, dusk was beginning to shroud the office blocks, which rose around us in darkness. We lined up and stood to attention as an officer addressed us. "This is a covert mission. It will not be included in the official records, and you will not talk about it. Drunk or sober or in the throes of passion with the toothless cross-eyed loves of your lives. Do you understand?" "Yes, sir," we cried out as one. No clearer what our task was, but more wired by the minute. I fell into step behind the man in front of me when the order came. "Single file." We moved forwards and I realized we were heading underground. A manhole cover was propped open and the soldiers in front of me were scrambling down it. When my turn came, I descended a narrow ladder affixed to the side of the wall. When my boots reached the bottom, I could just about make out that I was in a narrow tunnel. My breath frosted in the air, and an intense stench of decay made me feel suddenly sick. Further along the tunnel, out of my sight, some wit called out, "We helping the rats relocate, Sergeant?" The reply shot back, amplified in the claustrophobic space. "Zip it. There are low-life scum using these tunnels to hide in. We're going to flush them out, and when we reach the surface, there'll be a nice surprise waiting for them. 1,000 rounds a minute worth of instant justice, all out of sight of the bleeding heart civilians." My mouth felt very dry. Using the storm as cover to take out bad guys like this appalled me. But I had my orders, and I would obey. I tried to breathe nice and slow. We set off, soon branching off into groups of 6 as the tunnel split and split again. I was the tail of our drab snake. As we progressed, I wondered what kind of people were using this network of tunnels to evade the law, wondered what crimes they had committed to bring in highly trained troops to deal with them. Whoever they were, whatever they had done, they did not stand a chance. The soldier ahead of me broke wind. A quiet yee-haw followed from further down the line. The best of the best, I thought with a wry grin as I passed a new tunnel branching off to one side. We had not deviated down it. We were clearly keeping on straight ahead. I glanced down the new tunnel, wondering where it led, and saw movement, I said clearly into my radio. I'd been able to make out no details, just a blur of something travelling at speeds across the far end of the new tunnel, which must, I figure, have led to yet another tunnel which ran parallel to the one we were in. A moment of static followed. Then, "Acknowledged. Double check all weapons live." I have no idea how we were meant to open fire in here, if it came to that, without serious risk of hitting each other. But mine was not to wonder why. Mine was to do and... "Sergeant, possible hostiles, 3 o'clock. The voice on the radio crackled in my headset. "Eyes to your right, boys. came the reply. I tensed. It looked like it was time to flush some criminal dirt out into the vengeful light of day. The scream filled the tunnel. There was a heartbeat of silence, and then everyone tried speaking on their radios at once. It came out of the tunnel. Grabbed him. Hold your fire, Tarkowski. Can you hear me? Copy. I could see nothing. Just the forms of the soldiers in front of me in the gloom. I knew Tarkowski. He had drank me under the table on more than one occasion, had a goofy grin and a child on the way. I said a silent prayer that he was okay, and steadied myself. The call came over the radio again. Tarkowski, respond. He did not reply. I swore quietly. We needed to get moving again. If Tarkowski had been picked off by hostiles in one of the parallel tunnels, we were an easy target. Finally, the order came. Backtrack, we're going to the surface, regroup. But it was too late. Gunfire exploded. The sound in the confined space set off explosions of pain in my ears. Men were shouting. The man in front of me stumbled, fell to his knees. I grabbed him, tried to haul him back up. All the while, the sergeant was trying to hold back the chaos by yelling orders into the radio. He was so much white noise. I managed to get the soldier to his feet, then something tore him away from me, pulled him back to the ground, and there was a shape on him. Some body, some thing that held his neck in his jaws, and was biting. The soldier's body thrashed, and his hands beat at the thing that was attacking him. Moments later, he fell still, and the thing on top of him looked up, at me. Blood dripped from its teeth. It reared up, leapt towards me. I felt the impact, then nothing more. I don't know how much time passed before I came round. My eyes were drawn first to the flickering light, the naked flame of a candle. I realized as my sight cleared, the white wax stem was mounted in an ornate holder which twisted with an S shape down to the ground, where bones lay scattered. There were human skulls and rib cages, legs and arms, some broken, some whole, and what looked like skeletons of foxes and rats. All were intermingled and rose to form a platform on which sat a nightmare made real. She. I say she because the curves of her chest, visible beneath the torn, filthy rags she wore, rested on a throne of death. I began to retch. Around her feet lay bodies still wearing military uniforms. The pale skin was tight over the bone beneath, as if the blood that ran in their veins and nestled in their flesh had been taken. My comrades, murdered, defiled. I spat, tried to raise my head in defiance, tried to hide the terror I was feeling in every fibre of my being. "What the hell are you?" I asked. Her skin was wrinkled and scarred and danced with fleas, and when she smiled, as she did at my question, jagged teeth were revealed. She lifted one hand, waved long fingers, each nail of which looked as if it had been decorated with fresh blood. At this, a dozen creatures emerged from behind the throne and advanced on me. Like her, they wore rags over filthy, damaged skin. Pus hung from open wounds on some as they half crawled, half walked towards me. I saw that one held something clasped in its hand. It opened its fingers and threw a toy soldier at my feet. This was a couple of inches tall, made of green plastic. I'd played with toys like this when I was a boy, but what were these revolting things doing with it? The creature looked at me. Its eyes were narrow and clouded over, those of a being which favoured the dark over light. It pointed at the toy, pointed at me. Then a second of the creatures came forward. From its hand threw a small wooden block, another child's plaything. There was a question mark painted on the block. The paint was cracked and faded with age. The rest of the things then compounded my confusion by throwing forward dozens more toy soldiers. "I don't know what you want with me," I managed to say, "but all you'll get is name, rank and serial number, and a promise to see you burn in hell." The creatures turned to look at the she-thing who sat watching over us. She stood slowly and, with a twisted grace, descended. This sent the other things into a frenzy of activity that ended with more wooden blocks being laid at her feet. She studied them for a moment, and then one by one started to push individual blocks forward with her hands. Each block had a letter of the alphabet painted on it. Seeming satisfied, she stepped back. I read down the line of blocks. How many like you? I answered by aiming a wad of spit at her. It fell short, but I figured she had got the message. There was intelligence here, and she was clearly the smartest, the queen of the pack. I figured they had spared me to get intel on the scale of the attack that was being mounted on them. If I was to survive, I needed to act, and fast. But there was no way I was going to betray my fellow soldiers. To buy time, I pointed at the mold of toy soldiers. At a nod from her hideousness, the other creatures pushed them closer to me. I began to slowly count out plastic figurines. They watched me, seemingly transfixed, grotesquely childlike. I took my chance, threw myself at the knife I'd seen still in the belt of one of my butchered comrades, freed it, span round and pressed the blade against the queen's throat. "Unless you want a new leader, I suggest you all back off," I told them. They cowered, waiting, it seemed, for a signal. But she kept her hands by her side and did not struggle as I began to walk us away, through the tunnels until we reached the ladder reaching upwards. I held the blade closer, allowed it to dig into her skin, whispered, "Don't." We emerged into the street. There was no one else in sight, no sirens. The storm was here and the city appeared deserted. Wind and rain battered against us. I felt exhilarated. I held her tighter still. Her skin was hot and she smelled of fear, of danger, of the darkness and everything that was forbidden. My pulse racing, I led us away, into the night. I had escaped, with my life. I am off grid now, scavenging what I need and living in a derelict building on the edge of the city. After what happened, I can no longer follow orders, and I cannot live as an ordinary man again. I will live and die as I choose, free of all the constraints I once knew. I checked there was no one in sight out on the street and slipped through the broken door back inside the old abandoned warehouse. It was dark, cold. The musk of death and decay greeted me. I took the meat I'd stolen from the butcher's van to her. I held the small carcasses over her mouth and let the blood drip. She sighed, then pushed one of the wooden blocks she cradled in her lap towards me. Her fingers lingered on the faded rose-red heart painted on it. I put my hand on her ravaged skin and leant in for a kiss.